And joining me in the studio is Wamara Mwine, White House correspondent for Politics and Color for the White House National Examiner, or for the National Examiner?
It's White House National Examiner.
White House National Examiner. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Thanks for joining us today. So let's talk about some of the big issues that the White House is facing and some of the challenges they have in mobilizing, the Republican Party has in mobilizing the base. First of all, in the state of Massachusetts, the election of Ed Markey.
Yes, Gabriel Gomez was sort of seen as a Hispanic hopeful. You know, this was the guy that was going to ignite the party, and he lost by 10 points. And I think there wasn't enough money that was given by the Republican Party. Probably they missed out on giving him maybe $3 million that would have put him over the top. Now, 17 months down the road, he can run again against Markey, but he really needed to beat him now. And at the same time, he didn't have the support of the party, which is always saying, oh, we want to support these Latino and African-American candidates. Gomez ended up spending $900,000 of his own money, so it's kind of challenging now.
What, is that $900,000 he had, or?
Oh, yeah, he's a millionaire, but the point is that he shouldn't have had to spend his own money. There should have been overwhelming support from the party, and outside groups just spent $1.7 million for Gomez, in relation to Markey, who had, over, I guess, 6.5.
Right. Well, of course, Ed Markey is a guy who's been in Massachusetts politics and in the Congress and held a committee chairmanship in Congress for a number of years.
Yep.
And, he's a guy from Malden, and he resonates with a lot of people in the state of Massachusetts. By the same token, they had that victory by Scott Brown in 2010.
That's right. Yep.
And so the GOP thought that they, maybe saw blood in the water there for Democrats, right?
I think they knew that there was going to be a low voter turnout, and the reality is that Gomez was within 10 points. So it really comes down to finances. The money was not there. The GOP is saying we have all this funding for people just like him, and they don't give them the money, and then they lose. And then they wonder why they don't attract minority voters.
Right. I mean, why didn't they cough it up if they have all this money? It seems like they could have used his help. He could have used their help.
Oh, definitely. There's no question. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms I've had, over several years, I mean, going back to even 2005, I'd written about the former RNC chairman, Ed Gillespie, and now he says he has $6 million to go and recruit almost 200 candidates across the country. Well, that $6 million would have easily put Gomez over the top in terms of this election, but none of that money was diverted to Gomez. And I think it comes down to what you're saying and what you're doing. And I think the mixed messaging and the numerous pieces I've written about Ed Gillespie more than any other journalist in the country, challenging him on point by point on these kind of things where he says he's going to do something and then he doesn't do it. And time goes by. A lot of the African-American Republicans that I wrote about, for example, Paul Harris, who's in Virginia, where Ed Gillespie resides right now. I mean, he could be in the Senate right this minute. I mean, this guy is very talented. He was, a state delegate in Virginia. He was the first African-American in that role. And he's a lawyer, and he has been recognized by the party. But it just seems there's a disconnect. They're going out to search for these people, but he's right there, and they're not talking to him at all.
Yeah, what is that all about? The Republican Party, a couple of weeks ago, who was it? Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, Republican, went on one of the Sunday talk shows, or maybe more than one, and said that if Republicans didn't throw in, for instance, on immigration reform, they could just kiss the White House goodbye in 2016. So there are members of the Republican Party who seem to acknowledge that there is, as you characterize it, a disconnect, across minority lines. Although I'm saying minority, but the truth is that more and more, the classic Caucasian American is now becoming at least numerically, the minority. Not so much in terms of influence, which is the challenge, I guess, in the GOP.
Well, Louise, I'll tell you a quick story. In Maryland, they had the first Republican Hispanic caucus. This was 2003 in the country. Okay, and they wanted one job out of the Republican administration, Bob Ehrlich's administration, and John Kane, who was somebody that I found out a little bit later was a racist, but he insisted that they would not get one job out of 126 positions. And these are Hispanics who are doctors, lawyers, people who are affluent in the community. So if the Republican Hispanic Caucus had not been dismantled by John Kane, these are the people that would be advising the Republicans on these immigration issues. But as it stood, he went to court. He had the elephant taken off of their emblem. I mean, he went to great extent to sort of humiliate these Latinos, and they're not going to forget that. So later on, Ehrlich lost, to O'Malley, and O'Malley, the former governor now, is positioning himself to run for 2016. I mean, he will be, in my best estimate, he will be the next candidate. I mean, even above and beyond Hillary, because Hillary's had her medical issues. So it's not just that the Republicans fail in these scenarios, but they open the door for someone like O'Malley to then move into the next slot where he's going to be a potential presidential candidate, which is, has other repercussions.
But there have got to be. I mean, I have covered Congress for many, many years, and I have done some White House coverage during Republican administrations. And not all Republicans are, to use your word, racist. I mean, the Republicans of vision and compassion and fairness in the Senate, in the House, in state positions, have been in the White House. I mean, I don't really believe that any of our last Republican presidents were racist. So why are people who are insensitive to these, absolute demographic requirements of political success, why are they in positions to really turn things so upside down for the Republican Party?
Well, a small percentage of people like Kane can ruin this, ruin the party's ability to do outreach effectively. So someone like Reince Priebus, the RNC chairman right now, he's got to rein these people in and say, we can't have any more of these kind of derogatory statements, these racist statements, that are causing the party to appear racist across the board. Now, just like the Republicans that I've written about, from Paul Harris to Nick Lott or Sophia Nelson, a former Republican who left the GOP because she felt that they weren't engaging her enough, these folks are all different scopes in terms of moderates and far right, and somehow the classification of a black Republican can't just be one particular mold. You can't stick everybody in one category, and that goes for the Latino leaders as well. I don't necessarily agree with all of Gomez's positions, but he was clearly highly visible in this race that the GOP needed to win to appear as if, hey, we really are committed to these folks. And, the inability to do that sends a message to other Latinos who are across the country who are interested in running for office as well.
Yeah, I think the turnout in the state of Massachusetts was a 27% voter turnout.
It was very low. I mean, in a state where there's 6.5 million, it was, there were, I guess, 521,000 votes for Gomez and, 640,000 votes for Markey. So that's, pretty tight. Not many people showed up. The Gomez people were right. There weren't as many people that could have voted because it was a hot day and there were other issues that were going on.
They lost the Stanley Cup.
They lost the Stanley Cup. Right. Exactly. So those kind of things affected the race. But I think, again, having an open dialogue, for Priebus just to even meet with some of these people is very difficult, and I think that's troubling. You can't say you're going to go out and recruit people when you're not talking to the people that you already have.
But like you talk about Gomez, and this would be his election to the U.S. Senate would have been a victory for Hispanic Americans, in the state of Massachusetts and really across the nation. Now there are lots and lots of businessmen who are Latinos who you would think would want to throw some money Gomez's way, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that again, he had raised, outside groups raised $1.71 million for him, just the resources that he could use against Markey. But what was troubling is that you have a clear deficit, somewhere between $2 and $3 million that would make the difference. And that's where the RNC comes in. And they pick up the phone and they call these people and they have to beg and say, look, we need this money, please. Wherever it comes from, there's a huge base of Republicans in Texas, for example, these old white Republicans that are almost going to die who have a lot of money. They consistently have given money to American Crossroads, for example. They could have easily funded this. I mean, it would have been no problem. It's like us going to an ATM machine and withdrawing $20. I mean, they could have done it.
Yeah. And I know that in the last Senate election in the state of Massachusetts between Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown, Elizabeth Warren was on the ropes for a while, but the Democratic Party and organized labor went across the nation and rallied support, lots of money and lots of union demonstrations in favor of in support of Elizabeth Warren. And really can be argued that's what put her over the top.
Oh, definitely. You've got a lot of these Tea Party people that are out there, and they're very passionate about what's happening in the party. But again, and this is where things are very unclear within the GOP, is what is the base now? Who are those base people? I mean, it's become a question mark. And, not to focus again on the far right extreme, but, Priebus and the other people at the RNC, as Bob Dole said, they need to close the doors and sit down for the next several months and try and figure out what is our message? Who are we? What do we represent? Just some very basic core elements. And they did this growth and outreach project, and they talked about some of these things. But again, Priebus is stuck in the project, in the PDF. It says, we will support specifically people like Gomez. And then when the opportunity came, he didn't do enough.
Right, which is a shame because there are plenty of people who are, African Americans, Latinos, who are conservative, who don't necessarily like the things that the Democratic Party does, or who don't necessarily buy whole hog the Democratic Party message and the entitlement programs and everything else. And more, if you have just conversations with regular Joes who just also happen to not be white Americans, we have really very, very few boundaries, philosophically speaking, as a people. So the fact that it doesn't translate into the GOP is really a loss to the GOP.
It's a loss. And then, for example, you're at Johns Hopkins, and I remember being on campus and being at the library. I mean, these are places that I'm drawn to. I like to read, and, not all African Americans are out there listening to rap music or drug dealers or what have you. The people that I've written about are very educated, articulate, and I think maybe the most compelling aspect of someone like Nick Lott is that he's very comfortable around white people, and I think that kind of person is going to be able to draw and get the GOP comfortable with the African-American community in a way that they haven't been able to do prior.
I'm talking to Wamara Mwine, who is White House correspondent, Politics in Color, White House National Examiner. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by Politics in Color.
Well, Politics in Color is demographically 21 to 57, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. I started blogging with them in 2008, just kind of out of the blue. I was in Baltimore and, again, reading quite a lot and thinking about the presidential election and how Obama would be a historical election. And then I was credentialed in January, and I came to the White House and started doing coverage, and we had a couple of sponsors. Of course, there's expenses involved, but I was able to really pick the stories I would choose, what I would cover every day, what I thought was important. And then I did some National Examiner, White House National Examiner writing, which put me in 91 markets, which was a lot broader, which helped address some of these issues that we're talking about right now. Once you get that information in that kind of market, these guys have to respond. So in a sense, if nobody's challenging them on these issues, they can sit and hide under their desks. But now, as we're talking about this, they're listening, and I think that's important.
Well, Mark, don't you think that a lot of this, the notion that there are these barriers from ethnic group to ethnic group and racial group to racial group, don't you think that you seem to be a young man, with your generation, the millennial generation, these barriers, young people don't even see the barriers. They just see other people, don't you think?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I do I look young, but I've been doing this for quite a while. 16 years I've been writing, and I think that there's still a population of people that are out there, and you see it with this Trayvon Martin case, for example, and where it can polarize and divide the country in certain ways. But what concerns me is that you've got some of these Republicans who are coming out and making comments about Trayvon Martin. When you're talking about somebody who's dead, it's such a low point. And then the RNC doesn't respond and say, oh, guys, you shouldn't say these things. So it seems that they're agreeing with what they're saying, these kind of comments. And then this has been going on within the GOP for some time. So, again, a very small population can ruin it for everybody else. And again, the guys that I've written about, Paul Harris, Nick Lott, Dylan Glenn, are very versatile characters who could be on the national stage. And let's face it, in America right now, we need new black leaders. I mean, there really isn't anybody out there. So I think, that was one of my motivations going back as far as 2001 to talk about these potential African-American leaders.
Immigration, we're all going to be watching the outcome in the Senate. And then I guess really more interesting will be what the House does with it.
Yeah, I mean, Rubio is tried to make himself seem as if he's the martyr for the GOP on this issue. But let's face it, the influx of people from the southern borders has created a larger population, which has also generated and stimulated more money in the economy. And, of course, our economy is really in a big mess right now. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. The other thing I think for Republicans is they need to avoid being seen as obstructionists. Just being there to say no for the sake of being able to say no. They need to somehow come to some kind of agreement on things.
That's really true. Thank you so much, Wamara Mwine, White House correspondent, politics and color, White House National Examiner. That is a very good niche you carved out for yourself. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Very impressive. Louise Schiavone in for Tim Farley on the Midday Brief.